In today's episode, we're going to talk about men and their mental health. Stay with us.
For today's handshake or manly virtue, we're going to talk about suffering without complaining. Now, there's a difference between talking about your suffering to someone who can actually help and just complaining to someone who can't. A lot of times you get a headache, you stub your toe, you have a bad day at work, and we tend to complain and moan and lament our lot in life. And it really does nothing. It just contributes to the negativity of those around us, and is really just not that much different than whining. So as men, we should really develop the virtue of just holding our tongue and maybe complaining to the Lord or complaining to a professional who can help. But other than that, men should seek to suffer without complaining and without bemoaning their lot in life.
I know today's handshake certainly is something I've experienced and dealt with in my life. So before we get there, if this is your first time following us, please, on YouTube, click subscribe, click that bell button so you can get all of these episodes as they come out. If you're on a podcast, we're on every podcast player. If that's how you prefer to listen, definitely subscribe there. We want to continue to provide these things for you. If you're a fan of our memes, if you're a fan of our blogs, if you're a fan of this show, we encourage you to head over to patreon.com/CatholicGentleman and discern giving to us so that we can continue to provide things like this for you and other men in need.
So today I really wanted to talk about Catholics and mental health. Why do I want to talk about this? Like, why do we think that this was an important episode to have? Well, I think a big reason is men have mental health struggles.
Yes.
This is not something that's talked about very much, but men suffer from anxiety.
Yes.
Men suffer from depression. Men suffer from trauma. Men suffer from all kinds of mental health struggles, statistically at equal rates as women, or sometimes even greater. And yet, we also see this huge resistance among men, including Catholic men, to getting the help that they need, the mental health help that they need. Now, what's just a little bit of context here for anybody who doesn't know. I'm finishing a degree in clinical mental health counseling at Divine Mercy University.
Yep.
So it's a Catholic counseling program that is very much rooted in the best of the Catholic tradition of philosophy and theology and anthropology, but also the best of modern psychology and what it has to offer. And it does have things to offer. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But first, let's start off with getting a little personal here.
Yeah.
I think it's just good to be honest and say that we've both had moments, and just for me, I've had moments of serious depression.
Yeah.
For various reasons. Some of them loneliness, feeling disconnected from those around me.
Yeah.
I remember in college especially, I ended up transferring schools, but my first year of college, I felt really isolated. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was at this big school, and I'd go to the cafeteria, I'd eat alone, and then after that, I'd maybe retreat to my room and read for a little while, or go, just try to find some way to keep myself busy. But I was lonely, and it hurt, and it was depressing. And I remember just being so down so many days. I'd have a few good days or happy days, but it really was a serious bout of depression and just trying to figure out what was next in my life, find my major. I really had no direction or aim in life, and really contributed to this feeling of just heaviness and depression that really made me just want to cry some days.
Yeah.
And of course, I wouldn't have admitted that to anybody at the time, but it was a really hard period of life for me. I've also struggled with panic attacks.
Yep.
And I could go into all my history and everything and where that came from. I've moved beyond them now, thanks be to God, because I got the help that I needed. But there was a period in my life where I had really severe panic attacks.
Yeah.
And it would be something where I'd be cold sweats, trembling, to the point where I was embarrassed, like, is someone going to notice this?
Yeah.
But it was a real struggle for me.
Yeah.
So all that to say that men struggle with mental health issues, and I've experienced that myself.
Yeah, me too. And I appreciate you sharing, because that's exactly it. I was a worrywart, right? I was nervous throughout high school. However, I was very stoic in how I worried. Like, I had the poker face. Like, nobody knew that I was afraid. And I remember kids coming up to me. We'd have these huge auditions in front of hundreds of our peers in music. And they were always like, John, how is it that you like never look nervous or worried? And I was like, I guess my stoicism is like, is kept up high, because I likewise then had to get on anti-anxiety medicine in college. So I, wasn't struggling with deep depression, but I was struggling with just anxiety, anxiousness, and not being able to go to sleep and worry. And for years, right? This is not something that was just, there was these 6 months of my life that I did that. I still struggle with anxiety to this day. I've been through some of the most stressful months of my life, and I've had to get on some natural supplements, some 5-HTP and GABA and these sort of things, to neurotransmitters to help calm me down. Because I too have had panic attacks. And the first panic attack I've ever had in my life, I was in downtown Baltimore for a USCCB conference that I had to go to. And I started to have this panic attack, and I did everything. Like, I tried jogging in my hotel room. I tried going on a walk up and down elevators. I started practicing my breathing for like 10, 15 minutes. Anything I could do to calm myself down. And I couldn't, and I ended up just having to go to the ER, because it was like 2 hours of my attempted ability to control. And for somebody like me who has the pride and wants that control, to not be able to control, I was just totally beside myself. And I had to go to the ER, and they gave me some, Xanax or some sort of, half a milligram or whatever it was. It was and it calmed me down, and I got like 4 hours of sleep. And then I don't know if any people who've experienced panic attacks, but once you have the like physiological break, like, I started having panic attacks at the most random moments for the next 8 months of my life. I'd be sitting there watching a football game and immediately just all of a sudden have a panic attack, not thinking about anything. And it's humbling, and it's, and if you don't know how to combat or how to take care of these things in a healthy and appropriate way, you end up just, it just builds on top of each other. And like you said, not letting people know was something that I struggled with as well, because I didn't want people to think of me as less of a man. Because I struggled with these things.
Exactly. And let's talk about some of the reasons why men don't get mental health help. And that's a huge one. The stigma around it is, you're weak, you're broken, you can't muscle through it.
That's right.
A lot of guys have that mentality. Well, I'm just going to screw up my courage, and I'm just going to push through it.
That's right.
But a lot of times that doesn't work. And that's when you need help, is when your willpower is not enough anymore. We all get nervous. We all have moments of just mild anxiety, or, sometimes we'll have a bad day where we're feeling blue, but then the next day we're fine or whatever. That's a normal human experience. When you need help is when you can't control it anymore. When you're talking about, like, when you're having random panic attacks, when it's interfering with your life to the extent that it's causing repercussions in your life. So if you're depressed to the point where you can't show up for work, you need help. You need to get help for that. If you're anxious to the point where you're exploding at your wife because you're having so much anxiety and you're screaming at her as like a defensive response, okay, well, you're going to need to get help there. A guy maybe loses his job. We're at a time in history where there's a lot of unemployment right now. Huge depression around that, sense of purposelessness or discouragement around that. Get the help that you need. But again, that stigma around being broken, about being weak, about being perceived as crazy or whatever, a lot of guys resist that. Another reason, though, is that a lot of Catholics think, this is a huge one, I can just pray it away.
That's right.
Well, if I'm having panic attacks, or if I'm depressed, I just need to pray more rosaries.
That's right. Go to adoration.
Yeah. Exactly. And what we're talking about here is the mental health, like the mind, the psyche, is just as real as the body.
Yeah.
And the disorders of the mind can be just as real as disorders of the body. So if you break your arm and you're in serious pain and, maybe you see your bone sticking out of your arm or something, you're not going to just say, well, I just need to go to adoration.
That's right.
No, you're going to go to the
Exactly
emergency
right.
room.
Yeah.
And we don't have any problem with that. We don't think there's any shame in that.
Yes.
Getting physical help.
Yeah.
If you're bleeding, you need to stop the bleeding.
That's right.
Well, just the same, the mind is just as real. And again, disorders of the mind can be just as debilitating as physical illnesses. But we somehow can find some shame or some desire to spiritualize these problems sometimes, when what God really wants us to do is to find a professional who can help us.
That's right.
Like, get the help that you need. And so while I understand the resistance, sometimes we need to humble ourselves, swallow our pride, and get the help that we need.
Well, and the danger with spiritualizing things, and I really appreciate that because it's something that I've suffered with too, right? Is it becomes this sort of circular thing, right? Where basically it's like, well, if I was just doing this, if I was just going to adoration, praying the rosary more fervently, mortifying myself more, taking more cold showers, then God would see that I'm working so hard and he would deliver me from this suffering.
Right.
And then when that doesn't happen, what do we say to ourselves is, oh, ye of little faith, you just don't have enough faith, right? You chastise yourself for that.
Yes.
And you just start saying, oh man, if I just had more faith, then I could trust that God would do these things for me. And so now I've got to pray for more faith and go to adoration and do these things to increase my faith. And it just becomes this spiral that never ends.
Yeah.
And I really liked what Dr. Peter Malinowski, who we had on, stated that the issues of the mind, these neurotransmitters, right, are of the natural order, and we must look to solve them in the natural order, right? When we have, and you're a great example of a broken arm, or me being paralyzed because of, pains in my gut, and passing out, I had to go directly to the ambulance, to the ER through an ambulance, but then when you're having panic attacks, you go for a 2-hour jog and you do everything you can to try and control it, without seeking help, I guess is what I'm saying. So
Yes, and let's make this really concrete, okay?
Yeah.
Let's say a man was sexually abused as a child, and that does happen to men. Okay, huge amount of shame around that.
Oh, I bet.
The reluctance to talk about something like that is massive for a man. Just it presses all the buttons in a man that says, I never want to tell anyone that this happened.
I wasn't a protector. I wasn't a warrior.
But let's say they have mental health repercussions from that, which they probably will. Barring some supernatural grace, you're going to have mental health repercussions from that.
Yeah.
You're going to be depressed. You're going to have anxious. You're going to have panic attacks. You're going to avoid certain people or certain places. You're going to have flashbacks. You're going to maybe be hypersexual as a result of that. And act out in those ways. Maybe be, addicted to pornography as a result of this trauma in your life. And to expect that a trauma like that can be solved just by praying a novena or something isn't the case. Now, of course, God can do miracles. He can pour out any grace that he sees fit. He could conceivably heal that in a moment.
Yeah.
But again, what God wants us to do sometimes is to do the hard work of healing in the proper context with a relationship.
Yeah.
Which is what counseling or what therapy is a relationship. It's a healing relationship. And so just as we sometimes have physical ailments that take years to heal, sometimes we can have mental health issues that take years to heal. It's just we have to approach things, as you said. If it's of the natural order, we have to approach it in the natural order.
Yeah.
And traumas are very real. Sometimes your life doesn't have any traumas, but we can still struggle. It's okay. So I would, really encourage men out there who might be listening to this to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Get the help you need. Again, swallow your pride. It doesn't make you less of a man. It really doesn't. In fact, the vulnerability that getting help requires takes a tremendous amount of courage.
Yeah, well said.
Courage. A coward can hide from their issues for the rest of their life and hurt all kinds of people around them as a result.
That's right.
Because they never deal with what's eating them alive inside.
Yeah.
But step up, use the courage, or use the virtue of courage, and get the help that you need. There's an old saying in the mental health profession: you can't heal what you don't reveal.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into all the neuroscience of it and everything, but talking about problems isn't meaningless.
Yeah.
There's something healing about wrapping words around your experience. Sometimes we have this nebulous feeling of dread or anxiety that we just can't articulate. But the struggle to articulate it can in and of itself be healing.
Yeah.
Now, counseling isn't just talking a lot of times. We've done tons of research neuroscientifically. We've learned about the body and how it responds to stress. There's tons of techniques and things that can be done to heal a lot of these disorders of the mind and of the body that are often very related to each other. Panic attacks are physical, even though they may have their roots in the mind. But there's tons of research and techniques, cutting edge stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
So it's not just about talking all day, although that can be tremendously helpful. There is a lot of other things that can be done to help too.
Yeah. And I was thinking about another good saying that just came to my mind. Sister Miriam, I heard her say that she works with Dr. Bob Schutz and his healing ministry. And she talked about, hurt and pain that is not transformed is transferred.
Yes.
Right? So when you don't truly reveal these things, the pain and hurt that you are stoically pushing deep down inside of yourself and not allowing out will start being directed at other people, your kids, your friends, your wife, your parents, because you're not handling these things like a man.
Right.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because it takes so much courage to explain and reveal your failings, your weakness, right? In these situations. And I also want to caution people about seeing their faith as some sort of dispenser, Catholicism, in the sense that if I pray the St. Jude Novena and leave a handwritten version of it, somewhere in the church, then the prayer will be granted,
Right.
Because never mind a relationship with God, never mind, a conversation and seeing things rightly, as we're talking about here, you kind of approach your faith life as, if I put the money into the machine, then I will get the dispense, will come out to me as the reward which I am praying for.
Just press the right buttons and God will do what you want.
That's right.
He'll send down graces and heal all your problems. And that's not always the way it works.
That's not our faith at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to downgrade the importance of prayer. If you're listening to this episode, listen to any of our other episodes, and we talk about the importance of relationship with Christ in that prayer time that you need. But speaking specifically here of Catholic mental health and trying to look for, get out of jail free cards and stuff like that, it's just really not healthy for yourself or for those around you.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize what you said, that quote about what isn't transformed is transmitted.
Yeah.
It's not just about you. People who don't face their demons will inevitably hurt other people around them. And they say, well, why can't I just be like that stoic, World War II vet who just never talked about what he saw in World War II or whatever? Well, you know what? A lot of those guys, not all of them, but a lot of those guys hurt their families. They were emotionally distant, they were frozen, or they were alcoholic or abusive because they wouldn't get the help that they needed.
That's right.
And it caused generational consequences, which we saw kind of in the sexual revolution. All the hippies, they were children of those World War II guys who often wouldn't talk. They were too proud to talk about their problems or get the help that they needed. And again, that's not a rule. That's not inevitable. There were some really wonderful men who didn't talk about the traumas that they experienced during the war and who weren't destroyed by it. but there were many who were.
Yeah, and it's important to mention, like, statistically, there are many who were, like in Croatia, after World War II, the Croatian army, I think over a third of the men that returned from the war committed suicide within like 10 years after the war. And I mean, it'd be foolish for us not to pay attention to that. And those were the men who chose, unfortunately, to end their lives. But all the men that fell addicted to alcoholism, abuse of others, you know, this sort of just dark days of life because they did not transform that hurt and that pain and do so in a healthy, open way.
Right. Yeah, and alcoholism or any other disordered response to pain can do tremendous damage to our relationships and to ourselves and to our own souls. So we do need to take it seriously. You know, and you mentioned suicide. You know, I may not get the number exactly right, but the statistic is that the suicide rate among men is about 8 times higher than it is for women.
Yeah.
So there is really a men's mental health crisis in our world. Like that's why I felt the urgency to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because men have struggles, and we need to talk about it. And regarding the importance of our faith, it isn't that we're dismissing that. You look at the Psalms.
Yeah.
How many times did David cry out in complete desolation and despair, but also had moments of tremendous joy?
Yeah.
But he had moments, dark days.
He did.
You know, and he cried out to God in those moments.
Yeah.
And so we should take prayer seriously, but we also need to not treat it like magic in the sense that, well, again, if I just press the right devotional buttons, God's going to heal all my problems. And that's not always the case. So also, too, I just want to talk about for a minute, like, again, in relationships, how the damage that it can do. There's a verse in Scripture that talks about the sins of the fathers being passed down. This is in the Old Testament, I think Deuteronomy. But the sins of the fathers being passed down
That's right, for
to
generations.
7 generations.
That's right.
That doesn't mean that God is, in vengeance visiting the sins of the... No, what he's talking about is the consequences of one man's sin can be generational.
Yeah.
One man who has a problem with, again, like alcohol, and he's abusive to his family, emotionally or physically, he can ruin his children's lives.
Yeah.
And they, in turn, to deal with that pain, can turn to disordered behaviors that they then pass down to their children.
Yeah.
And that generational sin, that generational consequences of sin, I should say, is passed down generationally and leaves a legacy of brokenness. So again, it's not just about you. Realize that you're sowing seeds that will bear fruit for decades to come.
Yeah.
So get the help that you need.
Yeah. You know, and so we're talking about anxiety and depression here, but I think another point that could touch on the lives of men is kind of that, fight, flight, freeze, you know, that happens. And I know you brought that up. And something with a lot of our youth, right, is, you know, thinking high school and college and early 20s, mid 20s, even beyond, that is not appropriately addressed is that fear of taking action and your worries about the consequences, right? And so we're terrified about what might happen, of the fear of the unknown, right? We haven't learned to confidently abandon ourselves to God's will. And so instead, we're just paralyzed to inactivity. And so but it has to be filled with something, right? And so then you start filling it with video games, you start filling it with pornography, you start filling it, and it becomes this downward spiral to worse situations, right? And so know your temperament, I guess is what I'm getting at, right? Is know your temperament and see these things that are naturally coming out of you, and maybe you've been rejecting them for many years, right? Maybe you're a guy who's struggling to get a date, like we talked about in another episode, because you are just afraid, and you see your self-worth in the eyes of others, and in how others treat you and appreciate you. All of these things can be great opportunities to meet with a counselor and talk through things. So it doesn't have to be panic attacks or sexual trauma, although those are necessary to bring up to a Catholic health professional. But it can be these lesser things. I'll say even my parents wanted me to go see a psychiatrist when I was in high school because I was always so hard on myself and I always had to be the best. And they would see me studying for 2-3 hours before a test, right?
Yeah.
Because if there was a bonus question on the test, not only did I have to get 100 on the test, I had to get those 4 extra bonus points, right? And that's what I did to myself. And my parents lovingly were discerning, me getting help at that young age because of that. And so, and we see these issues going further and younger and younger and younger, right?
Yes.
We see poor men and women, young adults, or even younger than that, children, that are suffering from, cutting themselves, or suffering from, just these emotional traumas, and they're looking for an outlet, and they don't know, and it's because, that society where we don't face these things head on,
right,
with all the tools that we have in God's creation to help us. So.
Yes, exactly. Well, and I think you're talking about young children.
Yeah.
Many people experience things like bullying in school, and we need to take that. A lot of people say, well, it's just bullying, just get over it, tough it out, whatever. But there are actually kids committing suicide over the cruelty that they experience in school.
Yeah.
Now, let's say that happened to you 20 years ago, and you think to yourself, well, why don't I just get over it? This is something I hear with a lot of my clients, like, why can't I just get over it?
Yeah.
Just snap out of it, just get over it. Like, everyone's just telling me, why can't you just get over it? Well, there's some things that stay with you, where that part of you is still living as a child in that moment, and that past is still present in your life, in the sense that you're perceiving the reactions of others around you, almost as if you were still living back in high school or grade school when you were being cruelly treated and shamed and humiliated by other kids. And so you bring that fear and that pain into your adult relationships, and you can't figure out why you're repeating certain patterns and things like that. Well, that's one thing that counseling can help with, is helping get to the roots of some of these behaviors, because like you were saying about kind of disordered coping mechanisms where like video games or pornography or something, a lot of times we just treat the symptoms, or we want to treat the symptoms, where it's like, well, if you're just playing video games every day, well, let's just form some new habits, maybe just cut back or whatever. Sometimes that works. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you find yourself just going back and back and back to these disordered behaviors.
Finding new things to fill that void,
Which tells you that the roots may lie quite a bit deeper than just, well, it's fun. And a lot of times behaviors like pornography or any compulsive behavior that you can't control or can't get a hold on, they're rooted in emotional pain. They can sometimes go back decades. Yeah. And counseling can sometimes undo the knots in your mind. It's like a garden hose. It's all tied up in knots, and the water's not flowing properly.
That's right.
It's kind of like that, where like our spiritual and mental energies are all tied up by these things that have happened to us. And we feel like, well, why can't I just overcome it with willpower? But it's not that simple. Sometimes you got to undo the knots. And that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes we all need a helping hand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'd like to talk about, what if it's not you that's experiencing anxiety or depression or have had a trauma, but somebody close and personal to you is the one suffering from this?
Yes.
What are some of the things that we can do as loving friends, might be spouse or parent or, child, aunt or uncle, whatever the case is, that you have a close relationship with a person who's just really suffering from these things? I know there's never one size fits all with something like this, but what are some of the general thoughts and ideas that individuals can approach, a loved one who is suffering from, say, anxiety or depression.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you've got to have that honest conversation. Just say, I'm concerned about you.
Yeah.
I really am, and this is something that you've tried to overcome on your own and you can't. And let's talk about getting you the help that you need. Now, there may be some resistance to that.
Yeah, for sure.
But be persistent, because as I said, the men's suicide rate is very high. And that doesn't mean that everybody who's struggling with something is going to commit suicide.
Yeah.
But it does mean that unaddressed problems inevitably get worse.
That's right.
They don't get better.
That's right.
And so be persistent with that person.
I like that.
And how many of those people who did commit suicide didn't have somebody who helped them, didn't reach out to them, didn't say anything, didn't ask any questions?
Yeah.
Get them the help that they need. And just as someone who is in a car accident and they're unconscious, might need someone to take them to the hospital, or who can't drive themselves, need someone to take them. Sometimes you need to reach out and intervene.
I like that.
If they're not getting the help that they need, sometimes you need to be a little more forceful about that.
Yeah.
But you can't force somebody, but you can be persistent.
I like that. And I'd like to add just a couple of things that I've experienced with. I've had a handful of close relationships that have suffered from depression greatly, like you're talking about, even a couple that have discerned suicide. And one of the things that us as men often approach a situation like this is with an Excel sheet and a mathematical problem that we can solve, right? And so I want to caution listeners that something like this, as Sam said earlier, can often take years to solve. And you need to be that unconditional love and support for those years, right?
Yeah.
And this has been really hard for me if I'm, when anytime it's just like, well, we talked about this, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and that this is going to help you. And are you taking your meds? You start asking those questions, and then you start creating a wedge between yourself and the other person.
Yes.
And so I completely agree with everything Sam was saying about persistence. I've had some close friends that have committed suicide, and I've often wondered, you start asking yourself, like, what if I had just been a little bit more direct? And that being said, love is the key, but it's important to understand that these things take time to change. And if a person is resistant, or even if a person is open and accepting to that change, that we still need to be that loving support for them. And then just going full circle here, that it's not a math problem that can be solved. And sometimes men need to take a huge dose of humble pie and realize that there's not an equation that's going to cure an individual, with your prowess, So
well, and it is a relationship. It is, like I said earlier, it's a healing relationship. One of the most famous psychiatrists of the last, 50, 60 years, Irvin Yalom.
Okay.
He always likes to say, my professional mantra is the relationship heals, the relationship heals, the relationship heals. Because if you're going to seeking mental health help, and you want to be fixed, like, all right, fix me in 3 sessions.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
No.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Unless you just, I don't know, just stubbed your toe and you're depressed about it or something. Okay, well, maybe then you could be fixed in 3 sessions. But a lot of times people want this very formulaic approach where it's just, well, I've got 3 weeks, I've got 5 weeks, I got 6 weeks.
That's right.
And if you can't fix me, then you're just like a terrible therapist. That's not always how it works. And I've been seeing clients during my internship, and I've seen this kind of impatience in some of them where it's like, I just want the formula. Just give me a worksheet to fill out and I'll be all better.
Yeah.
That's not how it works a lot of times. So it takes patience, it takes time, but continue to be persistent in that seeking help.
I love how you just I was talking about a formula with helping others, but how often do we as men look for formulas to help ourselves, right? That's exactly right.
Give me the 3 steps.
It's my time frame, right? Like, I'll give you 6 weeks. I can absolutely understand that. Again, men's desire, our desire to control situations. And so if we're seeking help, great point. Understand that if it took you 15 to 20 years of tying that hose knot, it's going to take longer than 6 weeks to untie it all. And there'll always be that part of your life, with you. And so it's discerning how to return to that difficulty and that suffering with a healthy mind and with a healthy, being and stuff like that. So I know one of the things you talked about was fitness. Do you want to talk about ways that we can help ourselves?
Oh, yeah. Well, as far as mental health help goes, of course, there are things that you need to reach out to a professional.
Without a doubt.
But there are some things, too, that as they've done research on the human being and the human person, they've kind of identified some things that can help contribute to good mental health. One of those is deep connections, human connections.
Relationship.
A lot of times our depression or anxiety or pain in life can be due to ruptured relationships.
Yeah.
And a lot of times guys are good at superficial relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe with other guys even. We just keep everything very surface level. Hey, did you see the score on the game last week? Yeah. But sometimes we need to talk about emotions too. Do you have a trusted friend, a really good buddy that you can talk to about your struggles, about your good days, your bad days? I'm not saying you gotta, put everything out there.
Yeah.
But sometimes having a connection with, even another guy that can listen to our problems and really understand and empathize and just give us a listening ear can be really helpful. Having those deeper connections, I guess, is the point. So, yes, you may be married, but how deep is your emotional connection with your wife? Do you have a circle of friends that you can turn to and that you see regularly? That can tremendously boost your mental health to know. And the General Social Survey, which is a big survey of American people and what their status is mentally, they said they found that half of Americans, 1 in 2 Americans, says they have no one to turn to in a crisis. And that feeling of isolation, of deep loneliness, can just destroy your mental health.
I bet it could.
So if you find yourself isolated, take steps to get involved in genuine human connections. I'm not talking about Zoom.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Skype. Those can be great in their own way. They can help us talk to people long distance that we might not otherwise see. But don't use those as a substitute for real flesh and blood connection with other human beings. We need that. So connection is a huge one. And beyond just surface level, like seek those relationships where you can really be yourself. You don't have to put on a show. You can just be honestly who you are and be accepted for who you are. We all need that.
Yeah.
Second, befriend your body. I know that sounds weird.
Okay.
But a lot of guys have a disordered relationship with their body. They either see it as like an encumbrance. Oh, I'm heavier than I want to be, or I just, I don't like the way I look, or whatever. And so I don't know. I'm just gonna just eat a lot of junk food, gain weight, just kind of cave in, live in my head, live in the virtual world of social media and video games and things like that. But your body's health and your mental health are hugely related.
Yeah.
I mean, they've done it, more and more research is confirming this. Even emotions are embodied.
Yeah.
There's often, I can't think of any emotion that in some way doesn't have a physical sensation associated with it. I can't
either.
Like anxiety.
Yep.
You often feel it in your stomach.
Yep.
Or maybe in your chest. Or maybe you feel your shoulders tightening.
That's right.
Or maybe your hands begin trembling or whatever. Their emotions are embodied.
Yeah.
The healthier your body is, generally, not always, but generally, the healthier your mind will be.
Yeah.
There's a feedback loop there.
Yeah.
In the sense that often when we're depressed, it changes our eating habits and our physical activity for the worse. We just want to lay in bed.
That's right.
We want to eat the worst foods possible, which only makes our depression worse.
That's right.
Well, likewise, you can be in a good mood and have generally good mental health, but then you let your body deteriorate. You sit around, you don't do anything physical, and then you'll slowly notice that erodes your mental health.
Sure.
So it can start in the mind and affect the body, or it can start in the body and affect the mind, but either way, they're related.
Yeah.
So take care of your body, exercise. It releases neurochemicals like dopamine, serotonin that improve your mood.
Yeah.
It can really be a huge help. The other thing too, you were mentioning kind of your panic attacks.
Yeah.
Well, they've done a lot of research too where your rhythmic system, your breathing and your heart rate are very much related to your sense of fear and panic, that fight and flight response that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So if you can practice deep breathing every day, deep breathing from the diaphragm, not the shallow breathing, and learn to control that, and teach your body to relax on a regular basis, it then teaches, it allows you to control that anxiety response in a lot more powerful way. But it's a habit, it's a practice, and again, you're teaching your body to respond in a certain way. So take care of your body, take care of your relationships, and then finally, don't underestimate the power of spirituality in health, mental health. You know, we were talking about earlier about kind of offloading all of your mental health problems onto your spiritual life.
Right.
On the other hand, though, they've done a ton of research that people who have a strong spiritual life, who have a strong sense of spiritual meaning and purpose in their life, they have dramatically better mental health than people who don't. Who don't take their spiritual life seriously. And again, there's a feedback loop there where oftentimes distorted physical health or mental health can hurt our spiritual life. But oftentimes a weak spiritual life can hurt our mind and our body if we don't take it seriously. So they're all related. All three layers of the human being are related. The mind, the body, and the soul are all very much interrelated. The health of one affects the health of the other. Take them all seriously. Go to confession. Unconfessed sins can affect your body. I know that sounds kind of strange.
I believe it.
But if you're suffering from bitterness, from unforgiveness, from resentment, it can destroy your health. I've seen it. I've seen it in individuals that I've interacted with, where you know the pain that they've been through that is still never let it go. And it's eating them alive inside and affecting them physically and mentally. So take all three components of the human being seriously. And your mental health will improve.
Great. And I like this balance that you were talking about, right? Because earlier when we were talking about spiritualizing, it was ignoring two of the three, right?
Yes, right.
It's just assuming that third, which is incredibly important, could solve everything, right? And I loved how you talked about our physical health, right? Because that's just it. You're eating junky, you're a sedentary life, you're not working out, you're not doing any sort of fitness regime whatsoever. You're going to suffer the cost of that, and it's going to affect your mentality, right?
Yes.
And I know that as well. It's when I have heartburn, I'm anxious, right? And then if I take, some medicine for my heartburn, immediately I feel calmer, you know? And it's that connection that we have as this psychosoma individuals, right? That God has made us, that we have to take all of this into account. And so I'd like to talk real quick, because I know a lot of listeners, as myself would be included, hearing Sam say those things, knowing that I am struggling with stuff, I would go through my checklist and I would try and basically solve it myself. And I would say, okay, good. Okay, so I'm not doing fitness. That's my problem, but I'm doing the spirituality, and I'm doing the mental health, but I'm not doing, this. And so I'm doing the breathing and on all that stuff. And you're trying to, again, solve it yourself, but that's not what we are directly encouraging. If you have something very deeply rooted and something that you're suffering with, anxiety, depression, trauma, freeze, all these other things, you should seek help. And there is a whole, and I'd like you to talk about it, list of different, counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, what's the difference between them? Because I want to help men avoid that mentality of, oh, I can now take care of it myself. I just didn't realize that this
Yes.
is the side that I need to take care of, right?
Yeah.
And now you're handling it yourself, and that's,
Yes, right. So, a couple things there. First of all, if there are absolutely some disorders in our lives and struggles in our lives that we can heal through a more disciplined life, a more well-ordered life. And there are things like, let's just say you struggle with laziness or something.
Yeah.
All right, well, be a little more disciplined, have a more organized schedule, things like that. Okay, those are things that you can overcome yourself.
Yeah.
And that's not wrong. And we should encourage people to develop themselves to the extent that they can. However, there are definitely struggles in life where we have tried everything and we just find ourselves stuck.
Yeah.
We've tried all the techniques, we've read all the books, we've listened to all the, advice podcasts and things like that. And we still find ourselves repeating self-destructive behaviors against our own will. It's like something within us, a part of us, just takes over and we can't control it any longer. So an example of this would be something like panic attacks.
Yeah.
Where, again, that's something that you just can't control. It just comes out of nowhere. It just feels like out of the blue, and you're debilitated by it.
That's right. It is.
And it's affecting your life in a negative way beyond your ability to control. That's really the criteria.
Yeah.
It's affecting your life in a negative way beyond your ability to control. That's when you need to get help.
Great.
So, for example, these are not often things that are like faults or sins or failings. Like, let's say you got in a severe car accident 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And you still have flashbacks, or you still find yourself getting extremely anxious when you get in the car, break out in cold sweats, and you can't focus. And, okay, well, that's not just something that you can necessarily solve with personal development techniques or good habits or something. That's something that you need help with.
That's right.
And there are many techniques like EMDR and somatic techniques that can really help calm those panic attacks down, help kind of release that trauma that you've experienced. So that's something where you need to get help. Now, as far as so I hope that's clear, like the difference between what we can handle ourselves and what we can't. And another one would be like compulsive sexual behavior.
Yeah.
Like some people have tried everything to overcome that, and yet they can find themselves returning to pornography or buying sex or doing things that they loathe about themselves. They hate it. Like they wish they could just flip a switch and turn it off, and yet they keep going back to it.
That's right. That's cycle.
Or they're compulsively lying or whatever.
Yeah.
And those are, again, issues where you've tried everything, it's not working, get help.
Yeah.
Now, your other question was like, where do we go?
Yeah.
A lot of people get very confused about the degrees of mental health professionals. So I just want to lay that out for anybody who's confused. Generally, there's 3 tiers. There's the lowest rung, which is by no means insignificant.
Right.
But a master's level, like counselors. These could be licensed clinical social workers. These can be what they call LPCs, or licensed professional counselors. Like that's what I'm pursuing.
Yeah.
But licensed clinical social workers can do therapy. They can do counseling.
Yep.
And there's also, other like licensed marriage and family therapists, which specialize in couples and family relationships. But that's really generally the master's level is like the entry level to counseling or psychotherapy professionals. Okay. And that is by far probably the most numerous group of counselors and therapists. The next level is psychologists. Now they have to have a doctorate.
Okay.
So they're a little less numerous because it takes work to get a doctorate. You have to have a master's and a PhD. But they primarily, not always, a lot of them do counseling and see clients.
Yeah.
But a lot of them also do assessments.
Yeah.
Where they'll say, let's say a court mandates that someone be assessed for a domestic violence problem or a drunk driving problem. So they'll go to a psychologist and they will get an assessment, and the psychologist would say, well, he needs to be in an alcohol detox program or something, or he definitely has an alcohol use disorder, and so he needs to seek further help. And then at that point, they'll refer him to a counselor or something like that for continued help. Also, a lot of psychologists are often professors, so maybe they've seen clients for a while, but then they want to go into teaching and train others. Okay, that's very common because, again, they're doctoral level, and they have more training and experience. The top tier is psychiatrists.
Okay.
Now, this is what most people think of when they think of a therapist. They think everybody's a psychiatrist. Just because of, Freud and Jung and a lot of those early psychiatrists who kind of pioneered psychotherapy were psychiatrists. They were medical doctors. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. He's gone through all the same training as a regular doctor that you would see, but they also specialize in mental health. Now, very rare for a psychiatrist these days to see clients.
Got it.
Some of them will. But very few of them do actual psychotherapy or counseling. Most of them just write prescriptions. And they'll help you manage dosages, and they'll often work with a counselor like let's say the counselor says, well, you're having anxiety attacks or something like that, and I really think that medication would help you stabilize a little bit to the point where you can function, and then we can further our work a little more easily because you're not having panic attacks all the time. So then they'll refer them to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist will do their own assessment, and then they'll write a prescription. But again, most of what psychiatrists do is prescriptions. Psychopharmacology, they call it. But these days, very few psychiatrists see clients in a therapy or counseling setting. So those are really the top three tiers. If you're looking for mental health help, chances are you're going to see a counselor. And that's a good place to start. As far as Catholic counselors, there are directories out there. So first of all, the Catholic Psychotherapy Association, the CPA.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Yes. Has a wonderful directory of practicing licensed mental health professionals that have an integrated Catholic worldview. So a lot of people are hesitant to see mental health professionals because a lot of them have, just truth be told, a secular perspective. That doesn't mean they can't help you in some ways, but a lot of people want someone who's going to respect their faith, going to respect their experience as a Catholic, and who's going to bring a Catholic perspective on anthropology and psychology and theology to their practice of counseling. And I think that's a very wise thing. So the Catholic Psychotherapy Association has a great directory. Another one is called CatholicTherapist.com. Where again, not all, but a lot of Catholic therapists will place their name in there, and you can find one in your state. Due to COVID, a lot of therapists are now doing telehealth, or they'll do Zoom or another HIPAA-compliant telehealth platform that's confidential. But the point is, you don't always have to go to an office anymore. You can do digital. That is another option. It's one benefit that's kind of come out of the COVID situation. But I do recommend that if you can, you do see it in person. There's just a different dynamic. There's just body language and facial expressions and things that are missed over digital.
Absolutely.
I would encourage people to do in person if possible. But Catholic Psychotherapy Association, CatholicTherapist.com are two great places to start, at least, in finding a Catholic mental health professional.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Sam. I'm really appreciative of this. I think it's such an important topic, and I'm glad that we were able to dive in and better understand, hopefully for our listeners, I know for myself, these conditions that face so many men these days in growing numbers, and that we're able to address it honestly and talk about it, with a a degree of expertise and a degree of seriousness as to the situation that it causes, the lives that it ruins, unchecked mental health among men.
Yes.
So anyways, I'm very thankful and glad that we had this time.
Thank you.
All right, so heading over to our nightcap.
Yes, our nightcap, again, for those who may be new to the show, is where we show an accessory or an item that is either cool or helpful for a man to have.
Yeah.
So today, we're again turning to something very practical, and that is sunglasses.
Yeah.
These are some great sunglasses I got, are Ray-Ban sunglasses. Really enjoy them. For a lot of years, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I resisted getting sunglasses.
Yeah.
But the sun in Oklahoma can be really intense, like
yes.
blinding.
I know.
And so I was driving down the road one day, and I just found myself squinting and just, like, I could barely see anything. And I'm like, you know what? I need some sunglasses.
Yeah.
So I got this, Ray-Ban is, they're made in Italy. They have a reputation for quality and craftsmanship. So I got some Ray-Ban sunglasses. But just get some. There's no point in squinting, ruining your eyesight when there's lots of great options out there now.
Agreed. And I would say just a couple of things. I fell in love with Oakley sunglasses when I was younger, and I still love them. Unfortunately, one's been stolen, one's been lost, and I've got a bunch of kids, and so. Well, I guess one of the points is there are so many options out there. You can get polarized sunglasses at Dick's Sporting Good or at Bass Pro Shop or any of these places. Take a look at yourself in the mirror. Feel confident when you're wearing them. Don't be afraid to ask somebody else what they think you look like in them. But it can be a great staple of a man's wardrobe, and it also has good health benefits too.
Yes, exactly.
Where you're not getting migraine headaches and things like that because you're avoiding. So, anyways, thanks for showing.
Well, and as we remind every man who listens to this show at the end,
Be a man, be a saint.